Miriam trudged through the snow, each step heavier than the last, her body sore, her breath ragged. The bitter wind whipped around her, cutting through her clothes and freezing the sweat on her skin. Her baby, Samuel, was bundled tightly against her chest, but his tiny whimpers seemed to cut through the silence like a knife. He had been quiet for a long while, his small body too weak from the cold, from the exhaustion that came with the endless flight from death. Miriam's heart ached for him. He had never asked for this life, but he had inherited it all the same. She had once been married, once lived in a home she loved, in a life that was her own. But that had been before Henry's secrets tore it all apart. Before the men who now hunted her like prey had murdered him in cold blood, demanding the map he had hidden, secrets about gold buried beneath Frostback Ridge. Henry had never trusted her with the truth. He had only trusted her with the child they now ran with to keep him safe. But how could she keep him safe when she didn't know where to go? When the snowstorm blinded her every step. Miriam had learned what it meant to live with fear, the fear of losing everything, of becoming nothing more than a memory. And yet, as much as she wanted to give up, to collapse into the snow and let the elements take her, there was a fire inside her that wouldn't let go. Not for Samuel. Not for the life that was once hers. She had to survive for him, for the tiny hands that grasped at her, for the baby who had no say in what they were running from. As the wind howled through the trees like wolves in search of their next meal, Miriam heard a rustling behind her. Footsteps, not her own but someone else's. Panic surged in her chest, the air thick with dread. She knew they were close, the men who had killed her husband, the ones who would stop at nothing to get what they believed was theirs. She could feel their presence drawing nearer, just beyond her reach. And yet, she had no choice but to keep walking. No choice but to keep Samuel alive, even if it meant losing herself in the process. Miriam's heart raced as the sound of footsteps faded into the storm, leaving only the biting cold and the eerie quiet of the snow-covered woods. She had learned to expect nothing but danger from the world around her, but this was something else. A figure, tall and silent, moved through the trees like a ghost, barely making a sound, only the faintest trace of footprints marking his path. He was dressed in fur, his face etched with the marks of survival, his body language fluid, quiet, and controlled. His eyes, unreadable but alert, tracked Miriam's every move. For a moment, Miriam's instincts screamed at her to run, to escape whatever danger this man posed. But something about him, something in his stillness, held her in place. His rifle, slung low, didn't seem like a threat, at least, not yet. There was no malice in his gaze, no aggression, only a kind of curiosity and a deep, unspoken understanding of the world's dangers. The cold seemed to deepen as Miriam stood there, frozen in place, unsure whether to trust the stranger or run. Desperation welled up inside her as she glanced down at Samuel, his small body pressed tightly against her chest. The need to keep him safe overwhelmed her, but before she could make any move, the man spoke, his voice low and calm, a contrast to the storm around them. "Wait." Miriam flinched but held her ground. The words hung in the air, heavy, but not demanding. The man took another step, and Miriam, with her heart pounding, took a hesitant step back. But then he stopped and looked at her again, not with pity, but with a kind of understanding that made her feel less like prey and more like someone who had been seen. Without speaking, he turned, and with the barest hint of a nod, he walked ahead, making no move to chase her, but also showing no sign of leaving her. Miriam watched him for a moment, torn between her instincts to run and her growing sense of hope. She had never felt such calm in the presence of danger, and as she stepped forward, she realized she was choosing something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long: trust. Miriam followed the man through the thickening woods. Every step, heavier than the last. She was exhausted, her body screaming for rest, but her mind kept pushing her forward, driven by the need to survive for Samuel. The warrior, whom she now recognized as a Lakota scout, moved with a purpose, silent and sure, as though the land itself had taught him how to navigate this frozen wilderness. There was no conversation, no words exchanged. Miriam didn't ask his name, didn't ask why he was helping her. He didn't ask her why she was running or why the baby clung to her so tightly. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. He offered her no pity, no gestures of reassurance, only the steady, unbroken presence that allowed her to follow him without fear. For the first time since she had started running, Miriam felt like she wasn't alone, like there was someone with her, guiding her through the storm. But more than that, she felt a strange kind of peace. The silence between them wasn't oppressive. It wasn't empty. It was full of meaning, full of shared survival. As the night drew closer, they found shelter beneath the branches of a thick cedar tree, its massive limbs offering some protection from the storm. Miriam was grateful but tired. The world had been chasing her for so long, and she had no idea if this man would be a source of salvation or another danger. But in this moment, she trusted him, without explanation, without question. In the warmth of the small fire that the Lakota warrior built, Miriam finally allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. She watched as the flames danced, and as the light flickered on the warrior's face, she realized he wasn't just saving her from the elements. He was saving her from the loneliness that had swallowed her since Henry's death. There was something about him, something calm and certain, that made her believe she might yet find a way forward. The cold wind still blew harshly through the pines, its biting fingers dragging at Miriam's every step. But it was no longer the weather that sent tremors through her spine. It was the feeling that had been gnawing at her inside since the day she fled from the burning wreckage of her life. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted. Miriam had never truly believed she would outrun the men who had killed her husband, Henry, or the greed that had fueled their actions. She had hoped, prayed, that the wilderness would give her and Samuel enough time, but deep down, she knew they were too close. The tracks she left in the snow began to feel like a trail leading straight to her, and the isolation of the forest that had once offered her sanctuary now seemed to close in around her. The air felt thick with something more than just the storm. It was a presence, something intangible but terrifying. The men were coming. She could feel it in her bones, the same way she could sense when a storm was about to break. Her heart raced. Her breathing quickened. But Miriam kept moving, one foot in front of the other, for Samuel's sake. Tahuya, ever watchful, remained calm. His presence was like a rock in the storm, unshakable and still. Miriam had learned to trust him, not with words, but with his quiet, unwavering nature. He had said little to her during their journey, only guiding her through the wilderness, but now, with the threat of the men closing in, his silence spoke volumes. He moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the trees around them, his rifle always at his side. His movements were deliberate, precise. He didn't need to say anything to reassure her. He was prepared. But Miriam wasn't so sure. She had been running for days, her body aching from exhaustion and the cold, and she could feel the fear creeping back, gnawing at her resolve. She had lost her husband, had watched him die because of the gold buried under Frostback Ridge, and she knew those same men wouldn't hesitate to kill her and Samuel too if they got close enough. They were after the map, after what Henry had hidden. But Miriam knew that wasn't all they wanted. They wanted her silenced, just as they had silenced Henry. She was a loose end, a threat, and the fear in her gut only intensified the closer they got to their destination. She glanced at Tahuya, her silent protector, but the look on his face remained unchanged. He had led her here through the wilderness, away from the men, away from the world that had tried to destroy them, and yet now he was leading her straight into the danger she had been trying to escape. Miriam swallowed hard, pushing the panic aside. She had no choice. She couldn't outrun them forever. This was the moment she had been waiting for, to face the past and take control of the future. "Miriam," Tahuya said, his voice low and steady as always. "They are close." The words struck her like a blow to the chest, but she didn't flinch. The cold had already numbed her body, and the truth was, she had known this moment was coming. She had felt it in her bones long before they had crossed into this part of the forest. The men, the same ones who had killed Henry, were closing in, tracking their every step, inching ever closer to where she and Samuel had taken refuge. But Tahuya had no fear in his eyes. He had known danger his entire life, and now, in this moment, Miriam realized that he was preparing for it as he had always done, with patience and control. "What now?" Miriam asked, her voice hoarse. She was standing tall, even as fear churned in her stomach. She was done running. But what would they do when they came? How could she possibly fight back against men who had already shown how far they were willing to go? Tahuya didn't answer at first. He simply stood beside her, watching the horizon. His rifle rested comfortably in his hands, and he appeared to be listening to the whispers of the land, his body relaxed, yet alert. She watched him for a long time, unsure of what to do or say, until at last he spoke again, his voice breaking the silence between them. "You are stronger than you know." "Miriam," her eyes locked onto his. It was the first time he had spoken with such directness, and the weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. There was no pity in his gaze, no softness, just recognition and something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Respect." Miriam nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had spent so many days running, trying to avoid the inevitable. But now, in Tahuya's quiet confidence, she felt the stirrings of something new, something alive inside her that had long been buried beneath the weight of her grief and fear. She wasn't just running from death anymore. She was choosing to fight, not for the map, not for the gold, but for Samuel, for herself. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, the vulnerability slipping through. She wasn't ashamed of it. The fear was still there, still gnawing at her, but it no longer paralyzed her. She was standing tall. She wasn't afraid to face it. Tahuya met her gaze, his eyes unreadable but full of understanding. Then, slowly, he offered her the rifle in his hands. The weight of it was heavy in her palm, but his touch on the barrel was steady, guiding. "You can." With that, Miriam knew. She was no longer the woman fleeing from a past she couldn't escape. She was the woman who had stood up, who had made the decision to fight. She was stronger than the fear that had controlled her for so long. This was her moment. As the men's pursuit drew closer, Miriam could feel the change inside her. It was no longer just about survival. It was about protection. Protecting Samuel. Protecting her right to live without the weight of shame or fear. The gold didn't matter anymore. The map didn't matter. All that mattered now was the life she had. The chance to live it without the chains of the past holding her back. "They won't take us, Miriam," Tahuya said, his voice a soft murmur but full of steel. "Not today." The tension between them shifted, no longer one of uncertainty, but of quiet resolve. Miriam didn't feel like she was running anymore. She wasn't hiding from the past or from the men who wanted to kill her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had the power to choose what happened next, and when the men came, she would be ready. The confrontation with the men who had once chased her now loomed on the horizon. Miriam had made her choice. She wouldn't run anymore. But she was far from alone. Tahuya had taught her how to survive in this wild place, and now, when the time came, she would stand her ground. Tahuya's guidance had shifted Miriam's mindset. He taught her how to fight back, not out of anger, but out of necessity. The men had no reason to stop, but she had every reason to protect Samuel. The gold didn't matter, her life did. And when the moment came, she pulled the trigger, facing the danger head-on. She wasn't just protecting herself anymore. She was protecting her son, and she would do whatever it took to keep him safe. As the men retreated, it became clear that Miriam had reclaimed her strength. She wasn't the woman who had fled her home, terrified of the world. She was the woman who had stood her ground, who had fought, and who had won. Miriam's relationship with Tahuya was no longer one of uncertainty. They shared a quiet bond built not on words, but on mutual respect and understanding. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time, she felt like the future was within reach. Sitting beside the fire with Samuel nestled between them, Miriam finally allowed herself to feel the peace she had been searching for. The world might be uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she knew she had the strength to face it.